Ken Rollins is Chief AI Architect at Dell Federal. Welcome. It's great to have you here. What are you seeing organizations in the federal government doing to merge data, AI applications, to get the decision-making information, to get the efficiencies that they're looking for, and the other things that they're using AI for?
Yeah, it's really interesting. I think it really kind of starts with, they've got to define what their objectives is. What are they trying to accomplish? Once they do that, then I think a lot of it kind of naturally falls into place. I mean, once you figure out what is the outcome that you're trying to achieve, then that basically determines where that data is going to be needed in order to address that outcome. What's really interesting is, AI doesn't necessarily happen inside of the core data center. There's a lot of data, especially in federal DoD side, but we're seeing it as much in the civilian side where data lives at the edge. So the way that you approach doing AI at an edge standpoint is drastically different than you do if you just have a collection of documents inside of the core data center. So once you do that and you identify where your data is and what you're trying to achieve, then you can start getting into, that open ecosystem that Dell provides. We've done a lot of work, I think, in trying to develop some of the partnerships that we need and collaborating, especially in the federal space, because federal has unique needs. And so once you determine where your data lives, what that open ecosystem of people that you're going to have to bring together to the table in order to solve that problem, now you can start talking about infrastructure and whether or not you have that there or you need to build it out or what that exactly looks like. And then, of course, you've got services that wraps that whole thing up as well, and so we provide that. But I think you have to almost kind of take it in those phases. A lot of people tend to want to focus on the infrastructure first because it's really exciting, but I think you have to kind of determine all those steps before you can kind of figure out what it is and how you need to proceed.
Once you have gotten to that point, though, is building that infrastructure for data at the edge, for example, different than any other kind of computing or decision-making at the edge?
I think it's really, especially the edge standpoint, I think this next year is going to be really interesting in the fact that, we were doing, hyper-converged at the edge and everything else. But now we're looking at, there was announcements at GTC. There's going to be some other ones coming up here shortly at Dell Technologies World about the ability to run inferencing models, 100 billion parameter models, 200 billion parameter models in a small footprint at the edge. I think that drastically changes what that looks like. And then, of course, you've got to consider all the data movement possibilities and how you're doing training and everything else at the edge. So I think, the way that you approach an edge architecture, especially in terms of AI and how you're going to approach that model training, whether it's centralized, whether it's you're training at the edge, or if you're doing federated learning, I think drastically changes as opposed to a traditional data center architecture, which is still, very important.
In an environment like we're in 2025, where the capabilities exist that you just described, it's probably really tempting for agencies, though, to say, wow, that can do that. I wonder how I could use that, and maybe not go and do it just for the sake of doing it, but think from that direction rather than think, hey, we have a use case here. You see where I'm going with that?
Exactly, and it's really it's an exciting time. I mean, we're at the point where you can almost imagine, you have a problem, you can imagine what you want that solution to look like, and now the way that you can attack that is in a number of different ways. And I think the industry is doing a really good job of coming together. I think when you look at some of the agentic stuff that's coming out and some of the standards that are being done, as opposed to one organization trying to fight for their standard and somebody trying to come up with a new one, I think we're seeing a lot of collaboration that hasn't historically happened in the past. And so I think from that standpoint, addressing those kind of infrastructures and what you're doing at the edge and what you're doing at the core really start to fall in line and look really interesting.
Ken, it's great to have you here. Thanks for joining me today.
Okay, I appreciate you having me.